I finally got my hands on an Intel Arc B580, the chosen graphics card to save budget gamers. Well, kind of. Budget gamers who don't want a used card for around the same price to performance, and ones who are on a budget, but not that much on a budget, that they're using hardware old enough to cripple the performance of this, because that's a thing. But we'll talk about that later in the video. Regardless, this card is hot right now, continuing to be sold out for weeks after its release. My main reasoning for buying this graphics card is to use in my own personal build. I plan to daily drive it for the foreseeable future. But before I do that, I wanted to build a budget gaming PC around this because at $250 brand new, if you can get your hands on one, that's a very attractive price point. I put together this build sitting right next to me for $750 with this in it. And I think it's a great starter PC for anyone looking to get into PC gaming on a modest budget. So let me show you what's inside. I usually start with the CPU, but we'll change it up for this video and start with the graphics card because it's definitely the star of this video. This is the limited edition Intel Arc B580. You've likely seen plenty of reviews of this by this point, so I won't bore you with the specs. I specifically waited until I was able to get this model as opposed to an AIB one like from Acer, ASRock, Sparco, etc. And that was partly because it is the lowest cost one, coming in at $250 on Newegg, which is the launch MSRP. The other models can range between $10 to $30 more. Cost wasn't the only factor though. I really like the sleek and simple design. I think these kinds of cards usually look the best, and an added bonus is that over time they usually hold their value the most. As I said earlier, these are still often sold out on all the online retailers a month and a half after its release. But from what I've seen, they've been restocking somewhat regularly. I was able to get this by simply setting a notification alert on Newegg, and one random day it came back in stock and I got an email, and I was able to purchase it rather easily. It wasn't like I needed to purchase it at light speed or anything like that. So if you're in the market for this card, that's what I'd recommend you do. Set your alerts at the various websites and patiently wait. You'll get one eventually. As of making this video, I currently see the Onyx Lumi version is actually readily available, not too ridiculously overpriced. Sure, it's a little bit more for an AIB version, but I think this is a trend in a good direction that supply is catching up with the demand. For the processor, I chose the Ryzen 7 5700X3D. Given the overall price of the system, I think it's completely fine to build around the AM4 platform. It's still very viable, and CPUs like this are more than capable of pairing with the B580. Heck, this would pair well with much more powerful cards, so using this will give room to grow down the road when you're ready to upgrade to a higher performing card. I would honestly have no problems at all even pairing a $400 to $500 graphics card with this. Performance wise, these come in pretty close to the super popular Ryzen 5800X3D, which are really hard to find at reasonable prices as of recent. Most places you can find them, they'll likely be scalped by some third-party seller, but the 5700X3D is on AliExpress for a fraction of the price. They typically float around $150, that's the price I saw it for as of recording this video, and I was able to pick mine up for around $130 after coupons before tax. Cooling the 5700X3D is the Thermalright Phantom Spirit SE ARGB. This is a dual tower, dual fan, 7 heat pipe beast of a cooler that is on Amazon for only $35. The 5700X3D is not that hot of a CPU to begin with. It's got a 105 watt TDP, and the Phantom Spirit on paper claims to handle CPUs up to 280 watts. So this will keep things cool and quiet, no problem. The motherboard I paired with the 5700X3D is the MSI B550 Tomahawk. This is a solid AM4 board with some bonuses like extra thick and juicy heatsinks for the VRMs, heatsinks for both the M.2 slots, and a USB 3.2 Type-C port at the rear I/O, as well as a header for the front panel. This was actually an Amazon renewed purchase and came in like new condition. I was able to pick it up for $100, which saved me about $40 compared to brand new. But if you aren't okay with getting an open box deal like this, a board like the MSI B550A Pro would be a solid substitute for $110 brand new. For memory, I went with 32GB of DDR4 G.Skill Ripjaw's 3200 CL16. If you're on a super tight budget, you can get by with 16GB of RAM, but memory prices have actually been really good as of recent, with quite a few non-RGB kits like this one priced at around $50 for 32GB. Storage wise, I went with a 1TB Crucial P3 Plus, the Plus designating that it's a PCIe Gen 4 drive versus the non-Plus Gen 3 version. If you can make 1TB work, it's highly recommended. 500GB will easily be filled to the brim with just a few modern games these days. For the power supply, I picked up an MSI Mag A650BN. This is an 80 plus bronze unit with a 5-year warranty and finds itself at the C tier of the PSU tier list, a tier level that I have no issues with, and I think it's perfectly fine for a build in this price range. This unit is not modular, so all the cables are attached and unused one needs to be tucked away. This isn't really an issue for the case that I've chosen. The extra cables actually don't take up too much space once the required ones are used. It's mostly just the flat ones left over, like the Molex and SATA. The cables are all black, so no ketchup and mustard in sight. And I actually got a pretty good deal here on sale for 48 bucks. The case holding everything together is the Lynnwood LandCool 207. I've been a big fan of pretty much the entire lineup of LandCool cases. This is the newest one in their lineup, so I had to check it out. What excited me the most about this initially was their claim that it's a micro ATX sized case with ATX compatibility, which to me sounded awesome because I tend to gravitate towards cases that have smaller footprints and volume. But unfortunately, their claim isn't true at all. Dimension-wise, this thing is pretty much the same size as mid-towers from every other case manufacturer. That was a bit of a letdown, but nonetheless, at $80, it's still a great value case that's competitively priced in my opinion. All of the major panels use toolless design with the friction ball sockets as opposed to thumb screws, which I'm a huge fan of. I wish all cases used this design. It comes populated with two infinity mirror 140mm ARGB fans in the front and two black 120mm fans below the GPU. Directly behind the motherboard tray, there's not that much room as the panel goes up pretty close to it, but there is a decent sized channel to the left to run cables and plenty of room where the power supply would normally be because they moved the power supply to the front of the case in order to make room for those two fans below the GPU to pull in air unobstructed. Overall, no major complaints about this case, just that minor one about them calling this a micro ATX with ATX compatibility because that's not true at all. So now let's take a look at the build summary and price breakdown. I came in just a tad over my target budget of $750, which I'm usually very strict about, but in this case, I think it was well worth it going over a bit. I could have easily knocked the RAM down to 16 gigs, or the SSD down to half a terabyte, or the cooler down to a single tower that's less than 20 bucks. But to me, those weren't worth swapping out for a measly few bucks. I will say though that they are viable alternatives if you're really trying to bring the budget down by a lot more to say under like $700 and you stack all of them up at the same time. But over a few bucks, nah. So the build is looking pretty clean, and I did, out of curiosity, want to know what the difference was if there was a fan in the rear. So after building it, I did a quick test with and without an exhaust fan under an extended heavy CPU and GPU load, and I could not measure any meaningful difference in temperatures with the fan there. Maybe if you had much higher and hotter components in there might be a noticeable difference, but not as it is. But now let's see how this thing performs. The B580 is more of a 1080p card in my opinion, with the ability to play games at 1440p so long as your expectations are realistic. It's not going to be playing max settings, hundreds of FPS 1440p, but it can do 60 FPS in a decent number of games at modest settings, which you'll see in a moment here. I tested at both resolutions so that you can compare side by side, and the 5700X3D and B580 are running at stock, and the memory is running at 3200 CL16 profile. Resizable bar is enabled, and it's on Windows 11 24H2. So without further ado, let's check out the benchmarks. Alright, there you have it. The Intel Arc B580 in a gaming PC on a modest budget. What do you think? If we look at this build objectively, it's not unlike other systems I've showcased on the channel before. The B580 comes in at around the performance level of AMD's RX 6700 XT, a card that I've reviewed, used in builds, and have daily driven in my own personal system for an extended period of time. Despite that though, I'm still excited about this card because of what it stands for. A brand new card being released at an affordable price that is competitive against its used alternatives. Secondhand 6700 XTs start around $250 on eBay, and 3060 Ti's are around $230. And these are probably its top competition when you're talking strictly cards at $250 or less. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, and I do have to warn you about this card is by no means perfect. Far from it, actually. And before you go out trying to buy one, do your research. The biggest issue with it is that it can have performance issues in some games when paired with older processors. Just do a quick Google or YouTube search of B580 driver overhead issue and you'll find a number of resources discussing it. I'll have some link down below in the description. But in short, the B580 can perform very poorly in select titles depending on the processor it's paired with. A CPU like the 5700 X3D isn't as much of a concern, and there's even less concern if you're gaming at 1440p. But older and lower end ones, like say the Ryzen 5 3600 or 2600, CPUs that were widely popular when they came out and are still being used by budget gamers today, they seem like perfect pairings for a brand new $250 graphics card, but that's not always the case and may result in lower performance than expected, especially at 1080p. Even in my own limited testing, I saw this problem rear its ugly head, most notably in Forza Horizon 5, where the small spread between the 1080p and 1440p performance is a very clear indicator of this issue. It's not like it was a game-breaking issue and completely unplayable. It's not like it was like stuttering left and right or freezing, but there was performance being left on the table. Again, check out the links down below on this topic. I highly encourage you to look into it more if you are in the market specifically for this card so that you can decide for yourself whether or not what you're going to pair with it will impact you enough to matter. I specifically paired the B580 with the 5700 X3D for this reason, and I'd honestly be comfortable with pairing it with as low as like a Ryzen 5 5600. But anything lower than that, I'd probably start strongly considering the 6700 XT or 3060 Ti. Those are still very solid performers for their price and great alternatives for anyone hesitant on the B580 due to these driver overhead issues. At least until this problem is addressed by Intel, if at all. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on the build and on the B580 overall. Are you planning on picking up this graphics card? And if you've already picked one up, what are you pairing it with and what's your experiences with it? Are you enjoying it, or do the CPU driver overhead issues have you down and filled with regret? Let me know down in the comments. Hope you all enjoyed and found this video either helpful or entertaining in one way or another. I want to thank you all as always for watching and for continuing to support the channel. Shout out to the channel members and the super gifters for their above and beyond support. As always, be safe out there, and I'll see you all down in the comments as well as the next stream and or video. Bye.